So I'm Rachel Marshall. I am the Communications and Impact Manager within the Social Biobehavioural Research Group here at UCL. And I'm really excited to be supporting the Grace Epi programme, including this webinar series. And I'm going to give just a very quick introduction before handing over to our speakers for today. So for anybody who's joining this webinar series for the first time, this is part of our Grace Epi programme, which is a major new programme of work on arts and health funded by a Wellcome Discovery Award. You can learn more about this on our website or by watching back the first webinar in the series, which was Professor Daisy Fancourt giving an overview. And in this programme, we're aiming to engage in open and collaborative science, hosting these free monthly training webinars, which consider different methodologies, theoretical approaches and lenses. And we run these in partnership with different universities globally. And these will all be recorded and available to watch back afterwards on our website. You can hear about future webinars by subscribing to our newsletter. And we do actually have our next webinar already live, the one coming up in June, which will be with Project Create, which is a really exciting project hosted by the University of Leeds. And this is all about understanding the role of arts-based programmes in youth mental health and wellbeing. So there'll be some really interesting speakers in this next event as well, talking about all kinds of different methods, from looking at active ingredients, lived experiences, systematic reviews, and their living lab methodology, as well as some creative methods such as painting, photography, and filmmaking with youth co-researchers. So that's looking like a really good event as well. So we've posted a link in the chat as well where you can go and register to that next event. And if you have any other suggestions of topics or speakers that you would like to see, my email address is here, and these details are also on our webpage, so you can get in touch to suggest any future topics that you'd like us to co-host. Great, so on to today's session. We are delighted to have the team behind We Engage, a really fascinating project that has spent the last few years looking at how leisure activities shape well-being in later life, and what the barriers and enablers are that influence participation in such leisure activities. So in this webinar, we're going to hear about some of their findings, the implications for research, practice and policy, as well as some of the different methods they've used, which are really wide-ranging, from cohort data through to focus groups. So by way of quick introduction, we have Dr. Hei Wan Mak from UCL, along with colleagues Dr. Saoirse Finn. And then from the University of Edinburgh, we're delighted to have Dr. Olivia Turner, Dr. Katey Warran. And then finally, from the Third Age Trust, we have Dr. Harriet Radermacher. And we'll have time, as I mentioned, for a Q&A towards the end. So throughout this whole session, do pop questions in the chat for our speaker, and we'll get through as many of those as we can. But I think that is enough of an introduction from me. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to Karen, who will be our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Hei Wan Mak. I'm a senior research fellow at UCL, where my research mainly focuses on cultural engagement, leisure activities, and also arts participation. So thank you, Saoirse. So in this webinar, we'll be sharing some of the key findings from our projects We Engage, which means wellbeing, engagement and aging, over the past 2 years. And to start, I would like to briefly introduce the project and explain why we were interested in exploring leisure engagement amongst older adults. Next slide, please. Thank you. So people in the UK are living longer. While this is something to celebrate, but an equally important question is whether we're also aging well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Longer life does not necessarily mean better health, better well-being, or less physical limitations. And overall life expectancy figures can hide important inequalities in who is able to age well and who is more likely to experience isolation. So one factor that has shown promising potential is leisure engagements. Activities such as joining social clubs, volunteering, visiting museums and heritage sites, or taking part in book clubs may support health and well-being. They may also help reduce health inequalities in later life by creating more opportunities for social connections, participation, and healthy aging. So over the past 2 years, our project has explored how leisure engagement can support health and active aging, whether the impacts are the same or different across population subgroups, and what helps older adults to take part, and what barriers can prevent participation. Thank you. So to answer these questions, we combined secondary data analysis with primary data collection. We analysed national data sets, including the English Longitudinal Study of Aging, which has followed more than 8,000 adults aged 50 or over for around 2 decades, and includes rich information on their socio-demographic backgrounds, daily activities, and health and well-being. And to also understand current patterns of leisure engagement and identify emerging barriers to participation, we also carried out a survey and a series of focus groups. So in this project, we use the term older adults to include people aged 55 and over. And we made that choice deliberately because the patterns that shape later life health and engagement often begin earlier than we imagine, than we might think. So what this project adds, there are 3 things that the project will add. The first is that the leisure engagement is an important part of healthy and active aging. And secondly, it also explores both population level and lived experience evidence. So they're very strong evidence that we found from our projects. And finally, it examines both the benefits of engagement and inequalities that shape who can take part. So now I'm going to hand over to Saoirse, who will talk more about the health impacts of leisure engagements.
Thank you so much, Karen. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So hello everyone, my name is Dr. Saoirse Finn and I'm a research fellow in epidemiology and statistics at UCL, and I'm one of the co-investigators on this We Engage project. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to present some of our research looking at the effects of leisure engagement on health outcomes using UK population level analyses, and with a focus on psychological outcomes and also biological data. Now, due to time, I can only sort of give a snapshot of the methods, results and discussions points that we have. However, I have signposted to the actual papers if you are interested to explore them in more depth. And also we've got the Q&A, and you can also email us after if you want to discuss more. Just going to, sorry, there we go, get started. Perfect, let's start. So one of the core data sets, as Karen mentioned, that we used is the English Longitudinal Study of Aging, otherwise known as ELSA. So ELSA follows adults over the age of 50, asking them questions about themselves every 2 years. So this includes questions on demographics, socioeconomic status, health, biological markers, and leisure, which we are interested in. In ELSA, leisure is measured via 3 core questions: cultural engagement, including frequency of attendance at activities such as museums, theatre, the cinema, and concerts, frequency of volunteering, and attendance at different types of group memberships. So in this paper, we explored how cultural engagement in ELSA was associated with measures of social and mental well-being. To utilise the full data, we had 2 analytical samples. In sample 1, we had outcomes including depressive symptoms, loneliness, life satisfaction and quality of life, ranging across waves 2 to wave 9. And in sample 2, we had outcomes including anxiety, having a worthwhile life and happiness, ranging across waves 4 to 9. And we undertook separate analyses for each of these 7 outcomes. We used a method called fixed effects regression analyses, which instead of comparing one person to another, it compares each person to themselves over time. Therefore, this approach assesses within individual changes in exposures and how these are related to changes in the outcome over time. So, because of this approach, the model automatically controls for factors within individuals which do not change. So these include factors such as our ethnicity and our genetics. However, in this approach, we can additionally adjust for other covariates or time-varying factors that do change over time to help understand this confounding pattern, such as employment status or health, which we did iteratively. So our results, we found in fully adjusted models that more frequent cultural engagement was associated with lower depressive symptoms, lower loneliness, higher life satisfaction, and higher quality of life. Now, we found these associations were actually consistent across all of our covariate models. So I'll just leave that up there for a second. In our second set of analyses, we found similar patterns. We also found across all models that more frequent cultural engagement was associated with greater feelings that life was worthwhile, greater feelings of happiness, and lower levels of anxiety. We thought this was really interesting, and this mirrors a lot of the research that we find in the literature. However, we wanted to understand, okay, we see such effects, but are these benefits of cultural engagement on mental and social well-being universal, i.e., do all older adults benefit the same and in the same way? To do this, we tested whether the associations between cultural engagement, so going to museums, going to concerts, going to the cinema, and these mental well-being outcomes varied between older adults with different characteristics. So we did this via interaction analyses, so looking at differences in the associations by age, sex, living with a partner or not, as well as retirement, degree, and health status. So I don't have... Ian is highlighted there. I didn't have time to go into all of the results here, but there are a few interesting patterns I just wanted to pick up on. So we actually found that the associations between cultural engagement and loneliness were actually stronger for older adults living without a partner. We also found that the associations between cultural engagement and quality of life were stronger in individuals with a physical illness. So our take-home message from this is that more frequent cultural engagement is associated with better mental and social well-being among older adults, with some of these associations actually appearing stronger in individuals who we typically find to have poorer mental health. Now, despite the strength of the methods that we use, i.e. using fixed effects, which can account for different types of confounding and comparing individuals with themselves over time, and doing so in a large representative sample, it is hard to unpack the direction of the association between cultural engagement and mental and social well-being within this method. However, overall, our findings do suggest that ensuring equitable access to cultural engagement may support older adults' mental well-being, especially among those who may need the most support. So those who have physical illness and those who may be more socially isolated, who may actually benefit the most from being engaged. So in other ELSA work, we've also found that other forms of leisure engagement, so volunteering and membership to different types of group activities, are also associated with lower loneliness, lower depressive symptoms, and higher life satisfaction among older adults. So very much mirroring that we've seen for cultural engagement. Further, using polygenic scores, which are aggregate measures of common genetic variants that provide a single value genetic estimate of a trait of interest, we've also assessed whether genetic propensity to a trait, so genetic propensity to mental health and well-being traits, moderates this association between leisure and well-being among older adults. We found that these associations don't vary between individuals with different levels of genetic propensity to mental health traits. So this means that even individuals with a higher genetic risk to loneliness, depression, and lower well-being benefit the same from being engaged in leisure activities than those with lower genetic risk to the same traits. So moving quickly on to some of our papers. So we've also used ELSA to explore how cultural engagement, again, museums, theatre attendance, cinema attendance, may be linked to physiological ageing. So we analysed associations between cultural engagement and physiological ageing using an approach called using a doubly robust estimation approach, using inverse probability weighted regression adjustment. So this approach involves building two models to account for the non-random treatment assignment. So a regression adjustment model for the outcome and a treatment assignment model for the exposure. Now, only one of these has to be correctly specified, enhancing the robustness of the analysis, hence being known as doubly robust. So in this paper, the cultural engagement exposure was split into a treatment group and a control group. So the treatment group is those attending one or more of these 3 cultural exposures every 3 months or more, and the control group being those who never engage in cultural activities. The physiological aging index was estimated using a PCA-based approach. So this is a principal component analysis-based approach, using markers representing different bodily systems. This included markers capturing cardiovascular, respiratory, inflammatory, musculoskeletal, and circulatory systems. Then physiological age acceleration was calculated by subtracting a person's chronological age, so their actual age, from this physiological age index that was derived. Confounders were applied to both the exposure and the outcome, were sex, ethnicity, education, wealth, home ownership, employment status, physical inactivity, alcohol consumption, smoking status, and chronic conditions. So other covariates were also additionally applied to just the exposure and just the outcome, because remember we've got these 2 separate models. So activities of daily living and self-reported health were applied to the exposure model, and BMI and depression were also applied to the outcome model only. Cross-sectionally, older adults who were regularly engaged, so this top estimate here, had a physiological age of 2.2 years younger than those who were unengaged in cultural activities. These effects were also maintained 4 and 8 years later, and all of these associations were found independent of the identified confounders that I've just mentioned. So in summary, cultural engagement is associated with decelerated physiological age in older adults, seen both cross-sectionally and 4 and 8 years later. Now, despite a lack of a longitudinal approach limiting causal inference within this, findings were robust to several sensitivity analyses. This included adding different confounding structures into the models, separating out cultural activity activities independently, so looking at museums versus theatre versus cinema, effects were maintained across these different activities, looking at how these results looked comparing the sample when it was stratified by age, and also looking at dose response assessments of cultural engagement levels. We also applied doubly robust estimation, as I've just mentioned, which is a more sophisticated approach than standard regression when you have cross-sectional data. Overall, from an intervention design perspective, the findings suggest that monthly cultural engagement may be sufficient to impact physiological aging, with the strength of the relationship appearing particularly strong among those aged 50 to 65. So in our final study I'm going to present, we've also used data from the UK Household Longitudinal Study, also known as Understanding Society. So this is a population level study across the entire adult age range, which includes a very richly phenotype data on arts engagement and also leisure time physical activity. So in this study, we explored how arts engagement and physical activity were associated with biological aging, but using measures of epigenetic aging measured via epigenetic clocks. So our exposures were arts and cultural engagement, where the frequency of engagement in 39 different types of activities was measured across participatory art. So this includes singing, receptive arts, this includes going to arts exhibitions or concerts, visiting heritage sites, and also other cultural activities such as going to museums, which was coded into different frequency categories of sort of never engaging to incrementally engaging more. Additionally, we also looked at the diversity of arts and cultural engagement. This was measured by counting the number of activities and splitting this into quartiles, so low to very high. And we took the same approach when we were operationalising physical activity too. So our outcomes were 7 epigenetic aging clocks, ranging from first to third generation clocks. So epigenetic clocks estimate biological age by looking at patterns of DNA methylation at specific spots in the genome. These spots are selected because their DNA methylation levels change reliably with age-related processes. So DNA methylation is the addition of a tiny chemical tag called a methyl group, as shown in this diagram at the bottom, to specific spots on the DNA, usually at the CPG sites, as I just mentioned, which can turn genes on or off, but without actually changing the DNA sequence itself. These epigenetic clocks are trained on chronological age or phenotypic age, indicate a static epigenetic age, so just an age at one sort of epigenetic age, sort of one time point, I guess. And then you also have clocks that measure pace or rate of biological aging. So these are actually trained on longitudinal biomarkers. So we're able to look not just at static age, but also at how epigenetic age might actually, so the pace or rate of it over time. So we used IPWRA, which I've just mentioned in a previous study, to test the associations on 3,556 individuals with a mean age of 52 years. We also applied a range of demographic and socioeconomic factors to both models, as well as cell composition estimates, the outcome model only, which is important when you're using epigenetic outcomes, so blood cell composition. We also ran some sensitivity analyses, including controlling additionally for behavioural and health factors, and also restricting the sample to those aged 40 or above. This is due to evidence suggesting that ageing is non-linear, with the first substantial acceleration occurring in the 40s. So I think I've got about a minute left. So quickly, we found that both frequency and diversity of arts and cultural engagement were associated with epigenetic age. So, but we found that these associations were only really present for the measures of the third generation clocks that you can see at the top that were measuring pace of aging rather than static epigenetic age. And additionally, this link between more frequent and more diverse cultural engagement and slower pace of aging was more evident in sort of the higher frequency and diversity categories. We found similar patterns for frequency and diversity of physical activity too. And in sensitivity analyses, we found that the effects largely persisted when accounting for other health and behavioural factors. And when we restricted the sample to those aged 40 and over, we found the results were also maintained, but there were slightly stronger effect sizes in this older age group. In summary, despite the use of cross-sectional analysis, which was due to the data availability within the dataset, our results provide some of the first known evidence that arts and cultural engagement is related to epigenetic ageing. Interestingly, diversity of engagement appears as important as frequency of engagement, and the effect sizes are comparable between arts engagement and physical activity. So arts engagement is only recently being recognised as a health behaviour, but these findings suggest that it's important to continue exploring it, especially in relation to biological ageing processes, and it should be looked at alongside other types of health behaviours that are more commonly looked at, including leisure time physical activity. So if you're interested, as a team, we've also got additional papers at various stages of completion, focusing on leisure, health and biological outcomes, including leisure, engagement information, cultural engagement and cognitive trajectories, and a recent paper looking at arts engagement and proteomics to try to identify the mechanisms by which arts may affect health. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I think I'm going to be passing now over to Olivia.
Saoirse.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you so much.
Just going to bring up some of the slides. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. Sorry, I was just switching the screen share for everybody. Thank you so much to Saoirse and Karen. It was so wonderful to see all those findings together, and also to Rachel for that wonderful introduction. My name is Katey Warran. I'm a co-investigator on the We Engage project. I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, where I'm doing a Leverhulme Fellowship, and I'm also lead for our PATHS research group, which stands for Public Health, Arts, Theory and Social Science. And I'm also delighted to be an honorary fellow in this wonderful team at UCL. And I'll hand over to Olivia to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia Turner and I'm a postdoctoral research associate on the We Engage project, and I'm also based at the University of Edinburgh, where I'm Deputy Director of the Edinburgh Centre for Research on the Experience of Dementia. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivia. So we're going to start our presentation by saying a little bit about the underpinning theory for the We Engage project, and then we'll explore how we've been applying these theories in our empirical research, and then we'll outline our methods and share some of our findings on barriers and enablers to older adults' leisure engagement. So we're going to start by saying a bit about the theory. So one theory that we're using is COM-B. Some of you may already be quite familiar with this, but just to briefly explain for context, this model sees capability, opportunity, and motivation as three factors capable of changing behavior. So it suggests that in order for a desired behavior to occur, so in this case, we'll be thinking about social leisure activities, individuals must have capability. So that's having the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to engage. They must have motivation, so understood as the psychological processes that encourage other decision-making behaviors, and opportunity, so having the physical and social environment that makes the behavior possible. And individuals may or may not have different aspects of these, and they are, of course, very much interrelated. Now, moving on to our next theory, the social ecological model. Now, just in brief, if we think about the factors from the COM-B model that I just shared existing at the individual level, so in the middle of this diagram, it will help us to look at what other factors may influence engagement at other levels, such as community and societal levels. Now, again, some of you are likely familiar with this, and it was a model that was put forward by American psychologist Bronfenbrenner. He argued that an individual's development is shaped by interconnected environmental systems. So that's from the immediate surroundings like family, right through to broader societal structures like culture, moving from the micro through to the chrono level. Now, underpinned by these different theories, we've also developed a framework at UCL exploring the determinants of arts and cultural engagement called Radiance. Now, this framework was developed through cross-disciplinary literature reviewing, domain mapping, and consensus building. And the model has particular relevance to We Engage because it can be used to explore barriers and enablers to engagement at lots of different social levels which are interconnected. So we identified 35 different factors that can act as determinants of arts and cultural engagement in Radiance across micro, meso, exo, macro, and chrono levels. And we broadly categorise these as social, so that would be where the primary feature is the interaction of people. Tangible, where the primary feature involves physical assets or the production of physical assets, and intangible. So this would denote constructs that do not have a primary physical basis, but instead have a virtual or imaginary basis. And again, these things can be very much interrelated. Now, one of the ways that this model can help is to move the focus away from individual unique organizational contexts. So that might be something like an arts organization, whereby the responsibility may feel that to improve access is heavily weighted on individuals or on organizations. Whereas Radiance helps us to explore and acknowledge the multiple social levels that come to play from the micro right through to the chrono. So bringing these theories together within the We Engage project, we've applied Radiance as well as the COM-B and the social ecological model represented within it. And drawing on this theoretical foundation, we've delved really deeply into the barriers and enablers of leisure engagement for older adults, seeking to make suggestions and recommendations for improving access to resources that may provide support. So firstly, we've conducted the first empirical application of Radiance, so looking at this model within an empirical data set. We've also expanded Radiance out from just arts and cultural engagement, which was the original context in which it was made, through to broader leisure activities. And we've looked at factors across different social levels and theorised how they may combine together to create much stronger barriers or enablers, and centred intersectionalities and lived experiences. So we've been speaking to older adults about their perceptions of engagement. And we're currently in the process of bringing all of these different findings together in our empirical data. And my colleague Olivia is now going to expand on this for you.
Katey. So as part of the We Engage project, we work closely with a cross-sector advisory group and a wider knowledge network. And this group brought together people working across academic, health, policy, social, community and cultural sectors, alongside older adults with diverse lived experiences. And a key principle of our approach was incorporating lived experience. So in practice, this informed our data collection approach, including survey design, piloting focus groups, and strengthened recruitment strategies. And we're really grateful for their expertise and input, which significantly strengthened the relevance and quality of this study. So to set the national context, the latest estimates from government DCMS data show high levels of participation. For example, around 90% of adults aged 55 and over engaged in arts activities in the past year. However, despite these high figures, we know participation in leisure activities is not equal. engagement is socially patterned, with inequalities seen across the UK and internationally. People with higher education and income than those living in wealthier and more culturally rich areas are consistently more likely to participate. And this means that existing data can mask persistent social inequalities in access to culture and leisure. So it's really important to understand how barriers and enablers intersect across different social levels and to identify modifiable factors that policy and interventions can target. So to address these gaps, firstly, we conducted an online survey examining who engages in leisure, what activities they engage in, why, perceived impacts of health and well-being. And secondly, we ran focus groups with 61 older adults living in the UK. These explored lived experiences of leisure engagement in greater depth and helped identify barriers and enablers to participation. Importantly, both the survey and the focus group questions and the analysis were underpinned by the Radiance framework. So the survey results showed clear patterns of frequent leisure engagement. At least once a week, older adults reported watching TV, films, or documentaries, reading for pleasure, listening to music, and taking part in solo hobbies. But these activities are largely home-based and individual. So we then explored the survey results by empirically testing the Radiance framework using exploratory factor analysis. And this allowed us to identify latent constructs across barriers and enablers. And 3 key factors emerged: accessibility and inclusion, opportunity, and psychological and social. So within accessibility and inclusion, the barriers included lack of transport, poor access to spaces, health problems, inadequate facilities, and limited awareness of disabilities. The enablers included free or reduced cost activities and adequate transport and accessible spaces. Opportunity barriers included cost and limited choice of or quality of activities, while the enablers included convenient timing. Psychological and social barriers included not having someone to go with or not feeling welcome, confident, or skilled. And the enablers included social support, confidence, and skills. So we mapped these latent constructs back onto the Radiance framework. And this image here highlights how barriers and enablers may cluster and compound across the social ecological system. And these findings improve understanding of inequalities in older adults' leisure engagement across individual, local, and societal levels. And the focus groups then allowed us to explore these issues in more depth. So they examined individual, group, neighbourhood, and environmental influences on leisure engagement, as well as perceived impacts and potential interventions. And this enriched our understanding of how barriers and enablers are lived and experienced by older adults. And we're still writing up these findings, but for this talk, you can see how we looked at different elements within the Radiance and how they intersect. For example, looking at this first quote, we can see how opportunities, social network, and public health may intersect. The person's relationship to their mother, their social network, changed when they became a carer, which influenced their opportunity to engage, and this may relate to the public health resources available. And the next example shows how the social change brought about by COVID influenced engagement opportunities. That stopped when COVID came along. It didn't come back. And finally, an example which shows that economic systems and politics play a role in what opportunities are available. When you get a new government, a new council, it changes more rapidly. And across the data, we constructed 4 distinct patterns of leisure engagement. These patterns are produced by different combinations of barriers, enablers, and the intersecting factors across multiple levels. So the 4 quadrants are significantly supported to engage, barriers overcome to engage, severely limited engagement, and facilitators present but unable to engage. And importantly, these quadrants allow contradictions. So for example, facilitators can coexist with disengagement, and they don't represent fixed types of people, but different conditions under which leisure engagement becomes possible, fragile, foreclosed, or overcome. And we decided to take a case study approach and use an intersectional lens so that we could explore how the lived experience of leisure engagement in more depth, particularly how intersecting barriers and enablers operate in people's lives. Each case study is placed within a quadrant, not because of individual characteristics alone, but because of the wider intersecting structures that shape their opportunities to engage in leisure. In the first quadrant, significantly supported to engage, we can see a strong sense of social cohesion. Cultural and social belonging is aligning with individual motivations, preferences, skills, and confidence. And these individual factors are reinforced by what's available locally, such as organisations, activities, accessible transport links, and strong social networks, creating multiple reinforcing facilitators for leisure engagement. In contrast, the second quadrant, barriers overcome to engage, highlights individuals facing significant challenges, including their built environment, limited transport infrastructure, health issues, and experiences of social inequality, exclusion, and marginalisation. Despite these barriers, engagement is then made possible through other facilitators, particularly public funding and services. Financial support, such as pensions or travel concessions, enables access to volunteering and community organisations, which in turn provides social networks and places of belonging. So this illustrates how leisure engagement can be enabled at a policy level and supported by public funding, even where barriers remain at individual and local levels. And in the third quadrant, severely limited engagement, we can see how leisure participation is constrained by multiple intersecting barriers. These include a lack of culturally appropriate opportunities, experiences of social inequality, and a limited sense of belonging within mainstream leisure spaces. There are also few large-scale initiatives creating inclusive spaces for these communities, which contributes to ongoing cultural and social marginalisation. And as a result, leisure engagement is severely limited. However, participants also describe drawing on their own motivation, social capital, and community networks to create alternative grassroots community-led spaces. And while these alternatives are so important, the barriers they face remain significant and structurally embedded. And the fourth quadrant, facilitators present but unable to engage, highlights a different pattern. Here, individuals had strong motivation and were previously embedded in community-based social networks. However, the COVID-19 pandemic permanently disrupted their engagement by stopping activities and volunteering opportunities, breaking social networks, and leading to a loss of public funding and organisational closures. And these disruptions were compounded by reduced mobility and long-term caring responsibilities, which further limited capability and opportunities to engage. And this case also highlights the role of public health and wider economic systems and policies in shaping what leisure engagement remains possible over time through social change. And from the focus groups, we also identified five core themes that shed new light on radiance. And these include intersectional experiences, marginalisation from mainstream leisure, social connection and belonging, health inequalities and ageing, and life course transitions and identity. Radiance explains how systems interact, but intersectionality helps us understand how power and identity structure those interactions. These lived experiences are often missed in quantitative data because their importance lies not in prevalence, but in highlighting communities at risk of being overlooked in research and in policy. So to summarise, leisure engagement matters for wellbeing, and understanding barriers and enablers is crucial to supporting older adults' health and wellbeing. Participation is unequal, with clear inequalities in who can access and benefit from leisure in later life. Engagement isn't shaped by single factors, but by how barriers and enablers intersect across individual, local, and societal levels. Change requires collaboration, and addressing these challenges requires coordinated cross-sector action involving policymakers, health and social care, community organisations, and cultural and leisure institutions. A systems level approach is essential to reduce inequities and ensure all older adults have the opportunity to benefit from leisure engagement. Thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Harriet now.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me. It's great to be here. My name's Harriet Radermacher. I am policy manager here at the Third Age Trust. Thank you so much for the invitation. We were involved in the advisory group, as Olivia described, and we supported access to recruitment. And now that I've heard all the amazing findings, we hope to be sharing those with our community and further afield as well. But I thought it might be just helpful to tell you a little bit about who we are first, and therefore how it relates to this research. So I work for the Trust, the Third Age Trust, and that is the national body for the U3A movement. So what is U3A, you might be asking? So we're one of the largest membership organisations in the UK. Our members are those people no longer in full-time work, and they come together to learn, build friendships, and share what they know and love. And we've got over 400,000 members, and they meet in over 1,000 U3As across the UK. Each of them are independent charities, and they run what we call interest groups, and they're all powered by volunteers. They're all member-run and member-led. And we've been doing this for over 40 years. I wanted to focus a little bit on the interest groups, because this really relates to the focus of the research about leisure engagement. Now, this really depends on the U3A itself, and they vary a lot, and all the activities are done in groups, as been picked up in the research. We think that doing leisure in groups is so important, not just for the learning here, but for the social engagement. And these are all the kinds of activities that members may get involved in. So really a broad range there. So why, you're asking, why did we get involved with this project? Why are we on the advisory group? And this is mainly because while we're a huge movement, not that many people know about us. We think many more people could be involved and could benefit from being involved in something like U3A and access to leisure opportunities. But we find that there's not a lot of evidence research about the benefits of doing this, and specifically for us, the benefits of being involved in U3A. So being involved in this kind of research is really helpful in terms of getting it out there to sort of our potential members, and really describing the benefits of what it might be for them. And it helps us to raise awareness about our organization, which you would have thought it was quite well known with 400,000 members across the UK, but still many people don't know about it who could benefit. So our plans for the impact of this research and what we might do with it. I mean, it was so fantastic hearing from you all about the findings, and I'll need to definitely dig deeper into that to work out what's relevant to share and what's important. But our members will no doubt be very interested in the findings, and we will plan to share them internally. So via our website, we've got a monthly newsletter that goes out to over 50,000 people. We might well invite you, if you're happy, to come and do a national webinar to our members. They'd be very interested to hear. And also we've got a magazine that goes out to around 200,000 people, so we can think about putting an article into that. We also do a lot of social media press releases, so we'd certainly put something out through those channels. This here on the left is a report we wrote a year or two ago. We will continue to write reports, and we use the evidence out in the field to support what we do. So I imagine we'd be using some of your findings to go in there. And also we write submissions to relevant parliamentary inquiries and use evidence to support what we do there. So for example, the House of Lords inquiry into preparing for an ageing society, we used a lot of research to support why it's important that older adults continue to engage. To get in touch with me, and thank you again for us being a part of this, and look forward to working out what we share in the future.
Thank you so much, Harriet, and to all of our speakers for sharing those presentations. I feel like we covered a lot of ground and really, really fascinating. So we have some time now, I think just over 10 minutes to take some questions from the audience. So I'll give people time to do some typing, appreciating the presentations just finished. I can also see from the chat that we have people tuning in from quite a range of different places across the UK, Italy, Greece, Iceland, and from different roles as well, with some researchers, but also local authority staff, social prescribers and healthcare practitioners. So hopefully some different perspectives as well. So do let us know your questions via the Q&A box. I can see we have one come in, which is asking for the cultural engagement and social and mental well-being. Why not use linear mixed models instead of fixed effects of aggression analyses? The data are longitudinal. I don't know if someone would like to comment on that.
I can have a go, and then I'll see if Karen has some thoughts as well. So first of all, thank you so much for your question. So yes, you're right. Both linear mixed models and fixed effects regressions are appropriate for longitudinal data analysis. But obviously they ask and show different things, and they both have different strengths and limitations in their approaches. So in this particular paper that I presented, we did take a fixed effects approach because this allowed us to control for time invariant confounding, which helps with causal inference. But you're right that linear mixed models would allow us to look at trajectories of change over a time. This is an approach that we do take in our work, and we have taken in other papers. We tend to try and triangulate approaches across different methods in order to see if our findings are robust. So you're right, linear mixed models is a great choice for longitudinal modelling, but in this paper we use fixed effects specifically to account for time variant confounding, but we do use linear mixed models in other work. So thank you for your question.
Super, thank you, Saoirse. A question from me, whilst we wait for other questions to come in, is you had so many different methods that you were using across this project. I wonder how you found that and how you found working together, where you were running qualitative focus groups and then also looking at cohort data. Was there kind of learning that you were able to apply from the different methods, or were there challenges that came up because you were getting quite different information sources?
I can answer the question, and please feel free to jump in. So I really enjoyed this project because coming from more quantitative backgrounds, working with researchers with more qualitative background allows me to think about this leisure engagement and barriers of engagement quite differently, and really opens my eyes. And so I really enjoyed working with Olivia and Katey, and also Saoirse as well. And I guess one of the challenges would be that because we are thinking about the research questions quite differently, sometimes it could take a bit of time to get used to the way that we frame the questions and how we answer the questions, and how we can complement each other's challenges and how we can come up with the solutions. And because of the challenges, it actually leads to more interesting questions later on. So for example, we were able to use national data sets to look at the patterns and barriers of the engagement. But most of the time, these type of data sets, they ask quite traditional barriers. So socioeconomic status or how education prevents or encourage people to engage in leisure activities. But with qualitative researchers, we're able to like run focus groups to look at more emerging barriers. And Olivia and Katey were also leading on the focus groups using more arts-based methods. So like asking participants to draw roadblocks to understand what are the barriers that they face. And because of that, we were able to know more about some upcoming barriers that we didn't think of before. So I think that's really make this project really exciting and also quite unique in a way that we're able to combine lots of different methods to address these research questions. So yeah, don't know if anyone would like to comment.
I think we have a lot of trust and curiosity in our team, which really helps with these discussions, which enable us to critique and be really open to different perspectives and to combining things together. And sometimes we do experience contradictions from the different methods, but because we have that trust, we're able to question those things and grapple with those complexities, which I think does take quite a lot of cohesion in a group. But furthermore, I wanted to mention that the survey that Olivia shared was originally going to be used as a recruitment tool. But because through our discussions, we found and learned that there was so much we could take from that survey, we decided to make it a mixed methods project. So the original study design was that we would have a quantitative component at UCL, we'd have a qualitative component at University of Edinburgh. But the reality has been that we actually wanted to combine and integrate these things a lot more because through these different aspects, including the quantitative data, qualitative questions emerged through the epidemiological analysis, and quantitative questions have emerged through the qualitative work. So I think that survey really demonstrates that sometimes when you're using a tool, it can raise different questions that require different methods, and that's been really exciting. So the project's been a lot more integrative than we potentially initially planned, and I think that is because of this curiosity and the way in which you can grapple with these questions from multiple different perspectives and directions. But it's been a really exciting way to work, and I've really loved learning so much from everybody who's been a part of it.
Super, thank you so much. Another question here, and a compliment saying great presentations of huge relevance to arts and cultural organisations. And the question is, has the data you have drawn on allowed you to determine the relative benefits of participation versus consumption of arts and culture or leisure more broadly?
Hi, Richard. Thank you for your question. Yeah, really interesting point. So, if I'm interpreting this correctly, I think what you're saying is different types of activities in terms of participation, so like active or receptive engagement and other leisure. So, in some of the analyses that I've presented when looking at, say, the social and mental health benefits, and also in terms of physiological aging. So our exposure was cultural engagement. So we looked at that as a whole and found these effects, but then we also did look at the activities individually. What we found was that all of the individual activities, so this was cinema compared to going to a theatre, compared to sort of going to a museum, they all showed benefits, but some of them did show slightly stronger benefits. With social and mental well-being outcomes and the analysis that I led, we actually found that whilst all of these three activities did show social and mental health benefits, actually the benefits were slightly lower for cinema attendance, rather than sort of engaging more actively with like museums and the theatre. I think it's a really interesting question generally in terms of the research, and I think that there is further research that we could do, extracting this a little bit more, sort of comparing these factors a little bit more. And I think Understanding Society would be a great resource to do that, because it asks quite in depth about sort of active and receptive activity. So watch this space, and we should have some more findings to sort of go into that a little bit more in depth in the future. But thank you for your question.
Thank you. And I think potentially a related question from Crawford saying, did any of the cultural engagement types that were considered return positive outcomes that were more pronounced than others? From experience on the ground, often the social element of cultural engagement was the most important.
Yeah, again, really interesting point. So with some of the cohort data, we have to understand that there are limitations to what we know from it. So for instance, these data sets are brilliant because they're really large, they're representative, they ask lots of questions, but often because they ask lots of questions about health and social factors, they don't ask the detail that we might want about leisure engagement. So I totally agree that the social element can be a really important active ingredient of cultural engagement and leisure activity. But within some of the data sets that we use, we're not able to unpack whether or not people were directly or indirectly socially engaged. However, to counter this, when we designed our primary data survey, we looked at the limitations in existing cohort studies, and we did actually ask about whether or not people engage in cultural activities solitary or in groups. So there's still quite a lot of data that we haven't actually got around to analysing yet. So the question is, we don't know, we think so, but for the cohort studies, that's kind of hard to unpack, but we do think the social element is really important.
I just jump in very quickly. So Richards and Crawford's, your questions reminds me of the theoretical work that Katey and Professor Daisy Fancourt have worked on, which is called the active ingredients. So in the active ingredients, it's kind of like trying to understand what makes each of the activities special and unique. And one of the theory is that because each of the activity has what we call like an active ingredient, or kind of like, or components within that makes up of an activity. So things like social interactions, as Crawford you have mentioned, and also like cognitive stimulation or mild physical activity that comes within the arts and culture and leisure activity makes translates to activates different types of health mechanisms that then connect that to health outcomes. So theoretically, maybe like, and I say it this way, empirically, it can be difficult to test which activities have more pronounced health outcomes, because it depends on what health outcomes that we're most interested in. But theoretically, we do think that the more activities that a person engages in, the more active ingredients they will be exposed to, and therefore they will be that it will then translate to a stronger and more impactful health outcomes. Perhaps Katey, if you have anything that you would like to add.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. From broader research, and we've seen these social mechanisms being incredibly important, and there's a plethora of research that documents social mechanisms being very essential. But I think another study which would be really relevant is the one I worked with you, Karen, and Saoirse on, called Dance Connect, where we applied the social cure approach, which combines social identity theory and self-categorization theory. And we're very limited on time, but in brief, what this argues is that if you have a sense of belonging and meaning to a social group, then that may translate to internal psychological resources. So it's connecting that social group identity level to the individual psychological improvement level. And there is quite strong evidence, both quantitative and qualitative, that we see those mechanisms in arts-based groups and in broader leisure engagement as well. So I think it's quite clear from the broader research, both theory and empirical research, that social mechanisms and social identities are absolutely crucial and essential for individual mental health and well-being. And that was partly why we chose social leisure engagement for the focus of this study rather than individual leisure engagement. And that has been the object of study. And also within the focus groups for this research, we found social aspects to be incredibly important, and people have talked about their involvement in groups as a key factor in what has enabled them to participate. But I suppose the question is, what are the challenges for those who don't have those networks, and how do we get them into the places to build those networks, which are of course absolutely crucial, and there are certain barriers to that as well.
Thank you both so much. I feel like we could talk for a long time about this, but I'm sorry to have to call towards the end of the webinar. I can see we did have other question from Polly around questionnaires for older adults. But I think, am I right in thinking, Karen, you are happy for people to get in touch with you to kind of pass on any queries to the research team and follow up. So I'm just going to post a reminder of Karen's email in the chat for everybody. But thank you so much for everyone who joined us for today's session, for engaging and asking brilliant questions, and also to our wonderful speakers. We'll be following up in the coming days with an email rounding up some useful links about the project, as well as a link to the recording, so you can share that or rewatch And do register for our next event coming up with Project Create in June. And you can subscribe to the Social Biobehavioral Research Group to get those notifications of all of the future webinars that we're running, as well as other research and resources. But yeah, I will leave things here for today. Thank you again, everybody, for joining and for all of the lovely feedback and questions.